Okay.
Hello and welcome to Writers Read. Here we are again. And here we go with Paul's poem. Write, write, write.
Right, right, right.
Until you get it right.
Until you get it right.
Then read aloud.
Then read aloud.
You'll draw a crowd.
You'll draw a crowd.
And bring us great delight.
And bring us great delight.
Oh, good for you. Here we are, Jane. I'm so glad you're reading today. But I want to start with thanking you for so much you've shared with Horizon House. And the latest gift is to share the sun, what is it?
It's a sun mask?
The sun mask. I almost called it the sun moon. Sun mask. Thank you, Jane. It stops me in my tracks. It is just beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And now we get to hear what reading memory you have of an early event of reading in your life.
It was Dick and Jane Spot and Fluff.
I love
A
it.
first grade reader by a Seattle author, as I recall. That was a Seattle woman that wrote that book.
Oh,
I heard, yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yes, and I was never a real reader. As a matter of fact, reading was very hard for me. It was my 5th year in the university, and I finally found out, I got glasses, and found that I was extremely farsighted, and should have had glasses as a child. Yeah, extremely farsighted, and I found out that the print was black, not gray, as it always had been, and it was 3-dimensional. It came right off the page. Yeah. So I was not a great reader.
Oh my word,
until
that's
almost
amazing.
university. Yeah.
University.
Yeah.
But do say the title one more time. I have to remember. Fluff.
It was Dick and Jane.
Dick and Jane. I remember
Spot
that.
and Fluff, the dog and the cat.
Spot and Fluff. Oh, that's wonderful. That will bring a chuckle to many
see
people.
Dick run, you see Jane, all that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, Jane, what are you going to read today?
Well, I'm going to, there's so much war going on, I decided I would address World War II in Seattle for those who are not too young to remember it or were not here.
Wonderful.
They're not Seattleites. And what was it like during that time? But a bit of background, because this is out of my memoir, heavily edited, I might add, as a toddler, I watched them build the Aurora Bridge. That's my far eyesight, I guess, okay. I was fascinated by it from my grandparents' house. Then also, the second thing to pick up on, that I was in the 4th grade when I decided I was going to be an architect during the Depression. And I also had just moved, as the last year of grade school, we had just moved into this house, so that's the background to help with this.
Okay.
All right?
Oh,
Ready?
Ready.
Okay. Busing was a new experience and worked well, as I lived beyond the 2-mile walk restriction during World War II. The 35th Avenue bus line stopped in front of our house in both directions. Directly behind our house was an undeveloped wooded valley, including a peat bog. I still had nearby woods to seek out newfound wild blackberry patches. With buckets ready, I waited for my father to join me after work, and then it was off to the woods accompanied by our Cocker Spaniel. The highlight of summertime was a week at Horsehead Bay Camp. We were transported there on the Coleman Jot, the Osprey, from Fauntleroy through the Tacoma Narrows whirlpools, where a new suspension bridge was being constructed. Watching the construction from below, the workers spinning the cables appeared to be just hanging from the clouds in the sky. The following year, we steamed under our finished mini Golden Gate Bridge, which opened on July 1, 1940, to much fanfare. Due to excessive flexibility, it was immediately nicknamed Galloping Gertie. It was a real thrill to drive over Gertie, even on a windless day. The car ahead would disappear just like going over a wave. I managed to have 2 exciting trips during its short 4-month life before the magnificent dams in a windstorm when it collapsed into the whirlpools below on November the 7th, 1940. My 41 Osprey voyage was over the sunken steel and concrete remains with forlorn towers near each shore. supporting dangling cables. Gertie's final dance was caught on film, and I'm sure every structural engineer student since has viewed it. A day after Gertie was opened, July 2, 1940, the I-90 Lake Washington, a floating bridge to Mercer Island opened after 18 months of construction. People lined up on the east slope of the hill above the top of the tunnel thinking they could observe the failure of the first car drove across. Everyone knew the concrete does not float, and certainly the first cars of the bridge would sink it. I'm sure it took some time for the hesitant drivers to venture across the floating slab. Both new bridges signaled the end of the Great Depression, putting men back to work and creating our roads of the future. I certainly didn't know at the time that this floating bridge would also play a part in my future. Fauntleroy was a near-perfect little community, tucked into the southwest corner of Seattle. We were very fortunate to have a YMCA gymnasium recreational center connected to Pastor Mary McKee's small congregational church, just across the street from the grade school. Most of us had participated in the center's activities and sports, woodworking shop, and social programs since what seemed to be the age of acceptance. I also belonged to the tumbling team, a group of about 10 girls. We performed in the neighborhood theaters, shows, and at regional YMCAs. I liked the whole process, except being on stage. I especially recall how frightening the show was at the University of Washington's Heck Edmondson Pavilion during a halftime basketball game. Their brand new mats, ours were small, tired, and lumpy, seemed to stretch to infinity. Could we really cover them all? And oh, that crowd of 1,000 faces that disappeared into the smoke above. A few dates remain fresh in my mind, such as December 7th. It was a lovely sunny day, Sunday, when the radio's only voice announced all military personnel returned to your posts immediately, and repeated this throughout the day. It was not until later that we heard that Hawaii's Pearl Harbor had been bombed. Lives changed overnight, with young men joining the service in the shipyards and Boeing Airplane Company, gearing up for almost immediately to a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week production mode. We lived across just over the hill from the Boeing plants along the Duwamish River, and we're very much aware that if the Japanese were to bomb us, they would fly over Puget Sound and right over our heads and turn in, and we would, if they were a second off, we would receive the bomb instead. What happened to World War I, the war to end all wars that we had studied in school? Within a week, the U.S. Army had moved into our neighborhoods. The vacant lots were now, and schoolyards had become bases for anti-aircraft guns, barrage balloons, or searchlights. Unfortunately, true December weather returned with heavy rains, creating goodly amounts of mud at the Army's new tent campsites. The neighborhood residents invited the soldiers in for Christmas dinner, trying to lift their morale. Then we had to say goodbye to the two Easy families that farmed the valley floor to the east of us. We had no fear of them, and we knew that they were no threat whatsoever to our country or to any of us. It was a sad day, as we stayed with them until the Army truck came to pick them up along with their meager belongings to be relocated to inland internment camps. I was especially sad for the family on the east side of the valley, who had rescued me some years before when I'd had a bicycle crash at the foot of the hill in front of their house. I remember being dragged from the road just before a car barely missed hitting me. I was taken into their home, where it seemed like a small army of little Japanese children followed their mother's instructions as to supplies and medications to bring to patch up my many wounds. Of course, this all occurred in Japanese, with each child being excused as soon as they had delivered their item. The father was called in from his work in the garden, loaded my broken bike into his Model T truck, and drove me home. My mother assured the concerned driver that I was more scared than hurt, thanking him many times for his family's help. During the summer of '42, our new neighbor, Barbara Austin, was home from her boarding school in Vancouver, Washington, and we both got jobs at Providence Hospital, as everyone was working in war industries. I worked from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in the kitchen. One sunny day, I arrived home to see all their furnishings, clothes, and cooking utensils spread all over the Austin's family lawn. Barbara was alone and crying amongst the collection. Soon a priest arrived. No doubt a neighborhood had called, and he was trying to console her. She left with him, and I never saw any of the Austin family again. Later, Barbara called to say that they were living in a motel, and she would contact me for a get-together, but it never happened. I'd heard about foreclosures before. Now I would never forget the pain. Over time, the small Army communities became well established, and with a lot of free time, the soldiers took up gardening and landscaping in their campsite homes. Somehow the word was out about the peat bog behind our house, a wonderful material source. Small groups would spend their time digging and hauling out the black gold, as it was a year-round process, with them building bonfires to help fight off the chilly weather while they worked. Each day when they left, they would put their fires out. Well, what they did not realize, is the fire never truly went out. Thus, each summer for years, fires would spring up in the woods and in my blackberry patch. The problem was never really solved until many years later, until the whole valley was developed. Unable to ever put the fires out, they actually imported workers from Scotland to do the job. It was these workers that I talked to that I was first aware that they had accents were in our country. They didn't talk like Seattle folk. The first war, the new war, introduced us to ration stamps, little paper stamps, A, B, C, R, S, and T were used for gasoline. And other books were issued for coffee, tea, meat, cheese, butter, and shoes. Gasoline was not such as a problem as to supply. It was the shortage of rubber for tires and shoe soles that was the real problem. Therefore, fuel was primarily available for farm equipment and boats. This was a blessing, as we could continue to go to Horsehead Bait Camp on the Osprey, just as we had for years. Perhaps in some ways, we easily adapted to World War II because of our prior opportunities and abilities working together as a team during the Depression years. We lived with rationing, so to speak, and being without skills we'd already mastered. The war made us aware of what went on in our own homes and what the whole world was experiencing. Life would never return to our normal. Another unique circumstance of our childhood was our church's woman minister. Ordained women ministers were few and far between in the 30s. Usually they would be doing missionary work in some faraway place. Mary McKee was a big woman with a wonderful voice. I believe she had studied drama as well, and she was very effective in the pulpit. Her sermons were more like university lectures, using current events and applying them to Bible teachings. As this was the church I was raised in, I didn't truly appreciate my Sunday mornings until I visited other churches and found the services to be boring and dull. One sermon included a never forgotten phrase: "Some of the finest Christians in the world have never crossed the threshold of a church, while others attend church regularly and go out and do unchristian deeds." Perhaps this was my cover for not attending church in my later life. She also spent much of her time focusing on the youth and those in her congregation as a volunteer at the city, county youth correctional facilities. One of her World War II programs was to invite soldiers stationed in our community to Sunday service, and when the church members would take them home for dinner, returning them to the church at the appointed hour for the army truck to pick them up. Families were required to invite at least 2 soldiers, as this program only involved African Americans, and they wanted guests to be in a comfortable situation. Seattle had few Negroes prior to the war years, and certainly none living in our neighborhood, so the program started Seattle society. As our army was segregated, where did Mary find these black members? Years later, I discovered that they were the barrage balloon groups, whom only had 6 weeks of training to handle these huge balloons that like to escape and in the wind gusts and causing fires or electrical outages. New rules came with attendance at junior high school, where it seemed that the most important thing was to keep boys and girls separated. The boys' stairs were at the north end of the building and the girls at the south. And if you had a class at the north end and one just above, you had to walk practically a block to go back and forth anyway. For the girls, for the Fauntleroy girls who had been raised in the YMCA program where we always played with boys, it took some adjusting. The lunchroom and the auditorium were also divided. I joined the glee club, the girls' ensemble, and also sang in the church choir. Art classes were a favorite subject, especially painting sets for school productions. Miss Wong taught English class, where we were asked to write a paper on what we planned to do in our lives as to a chosen career. Of course, I wrote about my goal of becoming an architect. I was asked to report after class, where this very concerned, nice teacher counseled me to change my goals, explaining, I don't want to see you hurt, and they will never let you become an architect. I seem to recall thanking her, but I was not discouraged, because I'm not going to change my goal. During the early part of the war, the news was seldom encouraging, and I later found out that the neighbor woman, who was secretary to the head of the Navy, Seattle, had her children's bags packed, ready for evacuation to eastern Washington. Plans were on file to remove all women and children to the east side of the Cascade Mountains. We knew that if we had the Japanese were going to invade us, that they either had to come through the Straits of Juan de Fuca or south of the Olympic Mountains. The Grace Harbor areas, our ocean beaches, were now closed as the Army took over the campgrounds and the vacation cottages for housing while they patrolled the coastline on horseback. Puget Sound had been planted with numerous mines for Japanese submarines, with the ferries from Seattle and Fauntleroy weaving their way through giant mazes on their route to their destinations. As one got used to this pattern, it was always a concern when they changed the route, wondering, does the captain really know what he's doing? Like in our houses, no lights were allowed on or over the water, or beach fires after dark. Brother Jim had a small sailboat, which we often took out after dinner in the summertime. He believed himself a true sailor who would never need an oar, even when there was no wind. Frequently, the Coast Guard would see us out and tow when we were becalmed and tow us back to Fauntleroy. It seemed like a foolproof arrangement, but one night they didn't appear, neither did the wind, leaving us adrift until 3 a.m. Seattle neighborhoods were soon all organized under air raid wardens. The warden was charged with knowing how many people, their ages and sex, lived in each house. He was also out to check to make sure that the blackout curtains were in place and no light was leaking out. Our warden was Mr. Ford, the owner of the Texaco gas station, where I worked after school, as all the boys could get good part-time jobs in war-related industries. This is when I learned that there were mentally handicapped people. As Mr. Ford discovered, 2 hidden children in our neighborhood. They had never been out of their houses. One was even restricted to one room. How had such secrets been kept throughout all these years without others knowing? These were our neighbors, no doubt in deep trauma, secrets maintained to protect their other children, who could never have playmates in their house. At school, the fire drills also had companion air raid drills, where we hovered up against the inside structural walls, away from the windows or under the desks for protection. If we lived close enough, the students would go home to home, and the rest of us would just take cover. We became accustomed to these drills, but one day the alarm went off, and this was for real, not practice. And as we sat protected against the wall, we were soon playing games to kill time, but our teacher was in shock and we recognized her problem. It turned out to be another practice drill, but the school administration did not inform any of the schools of this surprise drill, so there was much criticism to deal with. Could or would we be bombed? I'm sure we were closer to it than we realized. After all, a Japanese submarine had entered the Columbia River and shelled the Oregon coast. Even our residential block had some war excitement. Archie Phelps, a King County commissioner, lived across the street from us. He was not a very pleasant man, and he certainly did little to win any appreciation from his neighbors. First, he had a large vegetable garden in his backyard, which county employees gardened for him on our tax dollars. Most irritating was his workday routine of coming out in the morning and starting up his large Packard or Buick car, pulling out the hand throttle and leaving the engine racing, while he went back in the house to eat his breakfast. As an official, of course, he could get all the gas that he wanted, while we were, of course, all rationed. One day, a special Army group arrived, asking us to clear out of the area as they were investigating a reported bomb in the woods just south of our house. The bomb was found and carefully removed, and the neighborhood was declared safe, as the bomb turned out to be Archie's bowling ball. It seemed his car had stolen, and the thief apparently had removed the evidence by tossing the ball out. My 10th, 11th, and 12th grades were at West Seattle High School, just a few blocks beyond the junior high school. We had freedom at last. We could use any staircase that was convenient. No longer were the boys and girls separated. The girls' playfield had been divided to accommodate an obstacle course, where the boys took early training for military service after graduation. The girls had to listen to their grunts, their groans, and their gasps while we played soccer. The first Negroes I really met were two new high school students, a boy and a girl from different families that had come to Seattle for war industries. They became the star dancers at the school dances, plus he organized the newspaper drive where he would direct his workers while he was perched high on the fence. We also had another unusual couple, a Russian brother and sister. His father was a sea captain, and he left them there in the U.S. at a safer place to be during the war. They certainly were way ahead of us in science and math, so they ended up having fun classes like in shop, music, and art. I always had a part-time job, a good deal of babysitting, and I set type and ran and pressed the card shop at Sears and Roebuck's. I worked in the neighborhood grocery stores. I picked berries, sweet peas in the summer, clerking in the Bon Marché department store bakery and the yard goods, as well as my gas station job, where I greased cars, packed wheel bearings, changed and vulcanized tires, using the irons to get them off and on the rims. Of course, I pumped gas, changed the oil, and glued all the ration stamps onto sheets for the next fuel delivery. But I also found time for some fun, plus skiing, swimming, and tennis. Mr. Ford, or Pops as I called him, the father of my his friend Rosemary, and my employer at his gas station, he considered me as his second daughter, and was also responsible for my introduction to performing arts. I was included like a family member to attend the traveling operas, symphonies, ballets, and stage productions that toured Seattle throughout the war era. Well remembered were the Russian Cossacks, but the most memorable of all was Paul Robeson in Othello. He had the most magnificent voice I've ever heard. It is a tragedy that politics destroyed his career. Many of the boys I knew dropped out of school to join the military service, and those that didn't all worked in part-time at good pay. I recall that my Sears and Roebuck's pay was 25.5 cents an hour, then 27.5 cents, and finally we made it to 30 cents. Drive-in movie theaters were the in thing for a date. During the summer, the cooler months, we would pool a siphon gas from all the boys' cars and for Dean's big custom Lincoln. We each had to take our turn siphoning, including me. The Lincoln could easily carry 10 to 12 of us with its jump seats and its extra space. At one time it had belonged to a movie star and had beautiful interior materials. It was the one car I was never allowed to drive, as it had air brakes. The war had few bonuses as well. The drafting teacher was paid to train senior girls for jobs at Boeing and other industries. This opened the boys' shop area, at least the drafting classes, to girl students. It was January 1943, and I managed to get into this architectural drafting class, the only girl. I became a friend of the instructor, Mr. Gordon, who could see no reason why I couldn't become an architect. Other than my parents, he was the only person who was encouraging. He often consulted me about his senior women students and their problems. New to him, as he had only worked with boys in all his years of teaching. I assured him that some required being personally praised. An A grade just didn't do it all. This special class was after school, regular school hours, where I also worked on my own becoming acquainted with a janitor when he came in to clean up. He was an American Indian, I assume one of our local tribes, and his wife was a religious leader of that group, of their group. He had her look up my star. They believe that everyone has a star. The report was dumbfounding, as he knew all kinds of things about me that nobody had known, and there were no any records. When I expressed interest, he spoke of the future, telling me that President Roosevelt would run for a 4th term, win the election, die early in the term. Then he reported and gave me the dates also of when the war would end in Europe and when in Japan. And finally, the last prediction was that I would, in my 90s, I would live into my 90s, and we would be at war again, this time with Asia, and we would lose, ending our reign as a world power. He thought I should think about it, as I would be here and he would not. I tucked this away in the back of my mind and didn't think much about it, and until I realized that he was absolutely on target with the first 3 predictions and dates. The last prediction seemed like infinity to a 15-year-old at the time. By now we were making progress in the war, so the blackout curtains no longer were in use, and our former little city of Seattle had become a real city. Long gone were the Hoovervilles and their wonderful little collection of cottages on the sites along the Duwamish waterway, where large dull warehouses for the port of embarkations, having replaced the colorful small gardens, picket fences, and fascinating small structures. The wood planks of Alaskan Way had been replaced with a concrete slab roadway, and no longer was one allowed to visit the ships tied up in the docks like we used to earlier. Another teacher besides Mr. Gorton that seemed to have an impact on my life was a creative writing teacher, Miss Belle McKenzie. She probably did more for prepare her students for college than any other teacher on the staff. First day of class, the rules and expectations were laid out, and from then on, you're on your own. Many written themes would be required during the semester that would be read in front of the class and discussed. Finally, a fewer number would be turned in written form and graded. The creative part was easy, but putting it down on paper was my failing. Therefore, my work would be returned with a grade of A over E. The A was for content, the E was for punctuation, spelling, and grammar. Despite this, Belle thought I had potential of becoming a writer. One day during lunchtime, voices became louder at the teacher's table, and I soon recognized that I was the subject of conversation between Mr. Gorton and Miss McKenzie. He was claiming I was going to be an architect, she was saying I was going to be a writer. I'm not sure about the outcome. I was embarrassed and left. I gathered that they never really were very friendly anyway. The World War was often the theme of our papers, sometimes referring to our enemies, to which Belle restated, "Remember, only the ignorant are prejudiced." This is a phrase I have often wanted to repeat to some narrow-minded individuals. This was an active class with students arriving early so they could be close to the lectern to read their work. I believe we all read more papers than required, and it was competitive. One day after reading one of my papers that I had turned in, Miss McKenzie announced to the whole class that Jane would not be graduating with the rest of them if she could not pass a student who did so poorly in English. A hush came over the room, and then the bell rang. Yvonne, the prettiest girl in the class, came up to me and she said, "Don't worry, Jane. I just know something will happen to make her change her mind." Of course I was concerned, as I wanted to finish school, so I could make enough money while the war was still on to go to college and study architecture. Well, something did happen. I won first prize in the King County High School competition for my essay on what young people think of the movies. The prize was a $25 war bond. There was a celebration at the end of the spring semester which took place on the Hiawatha playfield across the street from the school. I had to give a short acceptance thank you speech on a microphone. Unfortunately, every word I said bounced off the school building, then back to the playfield building, and then back to the school building. So I'm sure I heard every word a dozen times. I never wanted to get near a microphone again. My high school graduation in June 1945 was held in the ice arena, without the ice, of course. The class was about 350 in size, mostly girls, due to the large number of boys that had left to join the military service. It was not an impressive or very memorable event. The grand plan of making my fortune to get me through college was quickly dashed with the end of the war, first in Europe and then in Japan. Boeing and the shipyards closed overnight, even faster than they had started up at the beginning of the war. This left Seattle with a tremendous number of unemployed, many without funds to return home and without any job possibilities. College would have to go on hold for a while, and certainly I had to stay home, living at home. So my choice had to be the University of Washington. To accomplish starting architecture, it all depended on how much I could work and save. I needed to find a job through the holiday season and to have enough money to start part-time in January of 1946. I knew that my continued schooling had to be part-time experience as I would be self-supporting. By living at home, I would only have to cover my tuition, supplies, transportation, and some of my food needs. Downtown University Street between 4th and 5th was finally opened fully with removal of the center stage bandstand that had served as the public gathering space for the movie stars, their dignitaries who traveled through promoting the sales of war bonds. Older brother Jim's Navy assignment was as an airplane mechanic, and he serviced the planes that transported the Hollywood stars. He had wonderful stories about how nice they were, even taking them into their homes. The new piece now allowed the Metropolitan Theater and the Olympic Hotel to reclaim its position as the main attraction in the area. Unemployed and with leisure time, I joined my mother on a Greyhound bus trip to San Francisco. Mother was going to return to her beloved home after a 25-year Seattle vacation, which had been intended for a few weeks. Sailor brother Jim had not been home since he went in the Navy and was being stationed across the bay. He would be able to visit with the family at Aunt Lois's house, his grandmother. We all enjoyed a day at the Russian River where family members had old summer homes, refreshing memories of pleasant gatherings. With our brief vacation over, Mother and Jane were headed back home on a bus through the beautiful redwood forest. Unfortunately, a fire had started several days before, and now was in the redwoods, which we traversed through burning on both sides of the highway. We were the last vehicle on the road before the road was closed. It was frightening and heartbreaking to see those beautiful trees as flaming torches. Even worse was the screeching screams as their sap boiled, a noise I hope never to hear again.
Oh my goodness, Jane, I am just overwhelmed and stunned. What a gift to us. Oh, I was with you every minute. And I want you to consider giving me a hard copy of it if you want to.
You may have it right now.
Oh, really? And we would certainly love to put it in the Writer's Read three-ringed binder that's on the shelf of the library.
Okay.
Great. Do you want to?
I have a paper clip, or you can.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, I was just with you all the way. That was wonderful. Hi, Doris.
Hi.
So
How are
glad
you,
you're
Nancy?
back because this book now has your two readings in it. So do check it out, and I hope we get today's reading.
I definitely.
Oh,
and
excellent.
how I enjoyed Jane's reading because it brought back so many memories, including seeing Paul Robeson and Bello, and walking around downtown Detroit for, it seemed like hours. I was entranced. It was wonderful.
Great.
Thank you, Jane.
Now, we have, first of all, to hear your reading memory, and then we'll hear your writing.
Very good. My reading memory is the book that I read as a child, probably heard the stories from the time I was 2 or 3 years old. Christopher Robin, and this is my Christopher Robin book, and I have still imprinted in my brain many of the poems and can recite them by memory.
Oh, so I love that you brought that book
It's a wonderful. In fact, my mother, who was a school librarian, took it to be recovered. This was not the original cover because I'd worn out the original cover.
Oh, good to remember Christopher Robin.
Yes, indeed. One of my favorites.
Now, are we going to go to the island again?
We are. We are going back. I wrote a little introduction from the last time.
Great.
In an earlier Writer's Read presentation, I described how in 1951, Todd and I, as newlyweds at the age of 23, had a 1-year contract to teach in an elementary school in the isolated Alaskan Eskimo village of Savunga on St. Lawrence Island. The island is located in the northern Bering Sea, about 100 miles south of the Bering Straits and about 40 miles from Siberia, which we could see from the school on clear days, very clear days. I told about our, quote, brief processing in the Alaska Native Service office in Nome and how we learned that in addition to teaching, we would be handling the medical work, advise the village cooperative store and the village council, send and receive telegrams by radio because we had the only radio transmitter in the village. And then we also served as welfare agent. And of how we flew from Nome to the other village on the island, the village of Gamble, and then had to take a native skin boat, an umiak, from Gamble to Savunga across the Bering Sea for about 40 miles. If you're interested in the first reading, it's available on YouTube.
Yes, it
Now, and I guess in the library as well. I've gotten that. Now the early days. Chapter 5, We Settle In. Thursday, September 27, 1951. Dear Mother, although I don't know when this letter will get off the island, I'll write so that if a boat leaves in a hurry for Gamble, the other village, I can send it. Our mail deliveries are very irregular. We're kept busy with the school and all the other activities. There's been a kind of a summer flu epidemic around the town, and Todd has had several medical calls to make each night. He has to run around the village every day after the close of school and before his nightly radio schedule to see his patients. In addition, there are always people coming to the clinic for some sort of ailment. I sometimes think we have a village full of hypochondriacs. Miss Green, the missionary, was ill last week, so I would go up there several times a day to make her tea, etc. She's better now, at least well enough to come down here for dinner. I might add that Alice Green was the other 1/3 of the non-native population in the village. I don't know if we're making any progress at teaching or not. The children are all so shy that they won't talk to us and merely stare at me when I say anything to them. I've been making some cards with pictures of items such as boots, parkas, etc. on them, along with the words. But so far, not much response. Everyone says they will talk more after they get to know me better, but I'm about at the end of my patience. Todd's been about as discouraged with his older students. They are at a complete loss when it comes to any oral situation. The people as a whole, though, are extremely polite and very willing to help. I have a sewing class this afternoon, and we are making pin cushions. I really don't feel that this sewing class, really feel that this sewing class is rather ludicrous, as I can't teach them more than they already know. Most of the older girls can already make parkas and fur boots, so they really know much more about sewing as it applies to them than I do. I've just had an idea. I may have my sewing class dress one of the dolls in native costume and send it to your children at school. As I mentioned, my mother was a school librarian. And then maybe your children could send my little ones some old toys like blocks, tiny cars, etc. My little beginners don't have any toys, and they really need to be able to play and build things rather than work at regular schoolwork. Well, I'm gonna stop and get lunch now, so I'll write again soon. Love, Doris and Todd. The next letter is Tuesday, October 16th, and this is a letter to Todd's sister, Eunice. Dear Eunice, we're still waiting for the government ship, the North Star, to arrive with our year's supply of groceries. And all the boxes that were sent from Denver and Detroit with our bedding, towels, etc. We've been getting along quite well for this month, considering that we've had to live off the government food for the school lunch program that came last summer on the North Star. Mainly Campbell's bean and bacon soup for lunch each day. I might add, I have never been able to eat Campbell's bean and bacon soup ever again. We have supplemented that meager diet with canned food that we, quote, borrow from Miss Green, the missionary, who has a somewhat limited larder. I don't see how she could get by for a year on such a small selection of food, especially as she must eat the same thing at noon and again at night to keep it from spoiling. The only milk we have other than evaporated is dried powdered, so we've been practically living on cocoa. When our own powdered milk comes, I'll make it to drink, as we have ordered quite a bit of malted milk, etc., to flavor the taste. We'll be able to buy some reindeer meat when the North Star comes. Part of the reindeer herd was butchered on Nunivak Island, south of us, and the North Star is bringing some of the carcasses for sale on St. Lawrence. The meat is supposed to be very good and tastes much like beef, only more tender, so we're really looking forward to having a big feast. If the weather stays cold enough, I think we'll buy a half carcass, so we'll be able to keep it frozen outside in a locker under the school. Our living quarters are really quite nice. The rooms are heated by oil stoves, and I cook on one as well. It's quite different from cooking on gas, and I have had to get adjusted to different temperatures. We're situated out on a point in land which is set off a little from the village. We can see the ocean from windows on both sides of the building. Our water supply remains the major problem. We've ordered a pump to bring water during the summer from the creek about 300 yards away to a large storage tank in our utility room at the rear of the building. But at present, Todd and some of the older schoolboys have to carry the water in pails. Last weekend, Todd splurged and carried 2 ice cream cans full of water so that we could take real baths in the bathtub. We heated the water on the stove, and it was the most enjoyable evening I've spent since leaving Seattle. You'd never think that a plain, ordinary bath could be such a treat. We've almost decided to do it once a week, provided our water supply, i.e. Todd, holds out and the water pipes under the bathtub don't freeze. During the winter, we have a special fund to pay for having ice cut and melted. The villagers cut large blocks of ice from a nearby lake and bring it to the school by dog sled. We store it on a rack behind our shed. It is then brought into the storage tank to melt. I also keep a large pot of boiled water on our kitchen counter for drinking and cooking. We're still having some difficulty in teaching our students as they are so shy, but my little ones are getting a little more confident and are beginning to slap each other when my back is turned. I have been starting a daily health program in order to stress cleanliness. Each morning we have an inspection and look at nails, face and hands, ears, neck, and see if the hair is combed. I'm making a big chart to put on the wall, and the little ones who are very clean get a piece of candy. It really has had results. The little 6- and 7-year-olds come to school looking as if they have all been polished, since they all want their piece of candy. They are the cutest little children I think I have ever seen, and not the least bit bold or show-offy like many children of that age in the States. In the afternoon I have a sewing class. I teach sewing and knitting twice a week, while Todd has a shop class. And on Mondays and Wednesdays I have music for the older children. They enjoy singing, and so we have a lot of fun. I'm beginning to teach them holiday songs for our Christmas program. Well, Todd has just rung the last bell, so I must get to work. We'll write again soon. And this letter is from Todd to his sister Eunice and her family. Thursday, October 18, 1951. I'll add a note to Doris's rather complete epistle. I might add that despite the inconvenience of an isolated village, one big point in our favor is the financial one. I've never seen a place where I could walk around for a month with 50 cents in my pocket and have no need to spend it. No parking meters, no Salvation Army boxes, no newsstands, no drugstores, just plain nothing. Also, most commodities that we do get are plenty cheap on the whole. We're going to buy a reindeer for 35 cents a pound. Quite an expensive meat. Doris has a woman come in twice a week to do the washing, make bread, scrub floors, vacuum rugs, etc. for the tidy sum of $15 a month. This averages out to something under 25 cents an hour. My main headache, other than getting rather poor results with the kids, is my role as doctor. I operate a radio transmitter and receiver so that when someone gets really sick, I can contact a doctor by radio and give him the symptoms such as fever, location of pain, etc. Then he prescribes the medicine and frequency of treatment. As I probably told you, 9/10 of this job is left up to our imagination. So last week I was instructed to give shots of penicillin to a little baby about 1 year old. Naturally, my only experience with shots had been from the other end, so I was rather at a loss, except that I knew generally that you jabbed them and squirted the goop in. I was rather squeamish about poking such a man-sized needle into the rump of such a puny kid, but orders are orders. I jabbed at him, but he is a squaller anyway, and before I even touched him with the needle, he was screaming and doing everything but turning jackknives. And to make matters worse, the entire family, including all of the relatives, were standing around watching my performance. To make a rather embarrassing story short, I never did get him shot, even though I got him pricked with the needle a few times. I finally resorted to having his uncle do it. He had given shots before, and was more familiar with the kids. Since then, I've been more successful, having completed my mission of jabbing little kids in the rear end with these huge penicillin needles several times. It really isn't hard once you get onto the fact that you have to stick them hard and not be chicken-hearted about the whole thing. School itself is rather disappointing. Maybe I'm too fresh out of a college classroom, but everything I try to teach is hampered by the fact that the only English these kids speak is in the school during the school hours. Naturally, all the history, story problems, and math, science, etc. that I attempt to cram down them comes off like proverbial water off of a duck's back. The natural conclusion is to draw then is to teach them words that they need to know, or the names of some of the objects that they have seen before the idea registers. I can maybe get inspired and feel that I'm making progress at some future date. At this point, I don't know. The events of the community, while not too spectacular, nevertheless provide us with many hours of amusement. I'm beginning to feel like Aunt Melissa by letting the little incidents of gossip and the affairs of the community provide me with leisure enjoyment. But I have no choice. The other evening we had a meeting of the town council, of which I am an honorary member. Government employees are to keep hands off of the affairs of the native community and merely advise when necessary. The council began by discussing the usual community problems, one of which consisted of trouble they were having with some older boys getting drunk by stealing gasoline from one of the villagers and getting high by sniffing the fumes. A rather common village practice, since alcohol for drinking is not allowed on the island. The council then went about the business of trying to elect another council member to replace the one who had recently died. I might add that death is rather common here, for there's a lot of disease and many accidents. About 1 person out of every 3 is tubercular, and TB is very prevalent. The council members first asked me if I thought this was a good idea, and of course I stated that electing a councilman to take the place of the one who had died was a fine idea. After some haggling, they decided to vote by secret ballot after 3 men had been nominated. They asked me to vote, but naturally I declined. After a preliminary vote to eliminate 1 candidate, the ballot was narrowed to 2 men. Here they hit a snag. They voted 3 for one and 3 for the other. With the council president gone and no one acting, this left no one to break the tie. They haggled in Eskimo for some time and decided to have me vote to break the tie. Since this was the council's problem, I didn't know the candidates and didn't want to take sides in a village problem, I explained again that I wasn't acquainted with either party and hence was unqualified to vote. They translated my comments into Eskimo and kicked it around for a while. Finally, the man who spoke the best English said, "Oh, that okay. We vote for Alaska legislature all time, and we know nobody. We just guess vote." I tried to give another elementary lesson in parliamentary procedure, so had them debating the merits of each candidate. Finally, after the 4th vote, the tie was broken. Well, this has become a lengthy tale. However, I merely wanted to make my point that the community keeps us amused. And contrary to expectations, I haven't had time to be lonely for people yet, since I am surrounded by them. Well, it's time for my evening radio schedule, so I'll stop for now, right off, and even though we only get mail every month or so. Love as always, Todd. finally Sunday, October 28, 1951. Dear Mother, well, here it is, a week after I wrote you the last time, and the North Star still has not arrived, the ship. It was to have been here last Sunday, but the weather turned stormy and it was held up for 4 days. It finally got back to Gamble on Friday, worked there on Saturday, and was to be in Savunga this morning. But as luck would have it, the good weather we've had for the past couple of days disappeared this morning, and we have a howling wind of about 60 miles an hour. So the ship is still in Gamble and will remain there until the weather clears. No telling how long that will be. We are terribly disappointed, as we'd hoped to get our mail and also our food and have a big meal tonight. We're practically starving, with a lack of variety of the school lunch program food, which only has some canned sausages for meat, and Alice Green's food, which isn't varied at all. People at Gamble say that there's some kind of a naval station in the Siberian hills, which I mentioned we can see from our front porch on a clear day. Explosions have been so loud that they have shaken the windows in the Gamble school. There's a map of the Russian slave camps and a copy of Time that came out sometime in September. Excuse me. Excuse me. And we were able to see that there are 2 or 3 not too far from us. In fact, a prisoner escaped a few years ago and came to Savunga. We're not far from the international date line. However, we are on Bering Standard Time, which is about 4 hours earlier than Pacific Standard. So we're about 7 hours earlier than Detroit time. A note now that in 1983, Alaska time zones were changed from 4 to 2. Oh. So all of Alaska, except for some very far western Aleutian Islands, changed to Alaska Standard Time, which is now 1 hour earlier than Pacific Standard Time. The weather here doesn't get as cold as it does in the interior of Alaska or Canada, but the cold winds from the north, coming straight down from the North Pole over the Arctic Ocean and then down through the Bering Sea, make it seem colder. The winds sometimes blow as high as 80 miles an hour. The days are getting quite short. At 4 p.m. the moon was shining this afternoon and reflecting on the Bering Sea, although it wasn't quite dark yet. And it's just getting light when I get up at 7:30. Todd also has to get up in order to go down and turn on the generator for electricity before I'm able to get breakfast. I'm having quite a time with my little children. Our school is supplied with a series of readers published by Scott Forsman. They include stories about Dick and Jane, the older brother and sister, in a fictional family that includes mother, father, and a younger sister named Sally, as well as their pet dog Spot and Puff, their cat. The kids go to visit their grandfather's farm and have fun in the barn. The stories also tell of circuses, trips to the zoo, bus rides, etc. The stories and the words they introduce for reading are completely foreign in both language and concept. Our children don't have pet dogs. The village huskies are not friendly at all. In fact, they can be quite vicious. They are not well fed, since the walrus meat is given to them to provide stamina for pulling dog sleds, similar to the way we fill our cars with gas in order to drive the cars. Puff the cat is a foreign creature. I was told there was a cat in the village at one time, left by a Coast Guard cutter or another visiting ship. The cat lasted only a short time with the ravenous dogs around. And of course, stateside children do know the basic words like mother, father, etc., and can identify objects in the picture, Well, these kids start to school with no knowledge of English. I think I'm doing fairly well considering my lack of training, etc. A note with, in terms of fun with Dick and Jane. The Dick and Jane readers, published by Scott Forstman and Company, were widely used in classrooms in the United States and other English-speaking countries for nearly 4 decades, including Jane Hastings tells us in Seattle. They reached the height of their popularity in the 1950s when 80% of first grade students in the United States were learning to read through these stories. They described the lives and experiences of a stereotypical American middle-class white family in their suburban home and were designed to teach reading as well as American middle-class values to school-age children. Back to my letter. I forgot to tell you that I'm also the territorial agent for welfare and am required to investigate cases for assistance and report back to the authorities. If you don't have any ideas of what to get us for Christmas, I have one. We would certainly like a fizz bottle to make soda water for Cokes. Alice, the missionary, Alice has one, and it's nice to be able to have a Coca-Cola occasionally. The bottles are metal, and you'll also need to buy boxes of carbon dioxide cartridges. So if you could send us the bottle and a couple of boxes of cartridges for Christmas, we would certainly appreciate it. Send them by parcel post. We can have the Coke syrup sent over from the Northern Commercial Company in Nome, as it's cheaper to buy it there than to pay parcel post on it. But I imagine the bottle would be a lot more expensive in Nome. Needless to say, not much news, as we've had no mail since arriving here. Hopefully the North Star will be here in a few days. Love, Doris. P.S. I imagine you can get that bottle at any large drugstore or a place where they sell liquor supplies and equipment. In the States, it's used primarily for making soda water for mixed drinks because in the States, Coke syrup cannot be purchased except from wholesalers. However, we can buy it because we are outside the continental U.S. The next installment tells about the North Star coming with our food and our mail and our supplies and also our Christmas program.
Oh my, I look forward to the next installment. This is amazing to be on St. Lawrence Island with you.
So far away, so long ago, and such an unusual experience. It's hard to realize what life was like in an isolated village 70 years ago.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.